So there seems to be an interesting rumor going around about martial law coming into effect on April 20th. And while this has been debunked, I do want to urge you still to do your fact checking. Don't take my word for it. I did want to talk a little bit about April 20th because we do have some gnarly aspects happening on that day astrologically. Just so you know, I do talk about that more in depth on my April 2025 astrology video that's on YouTube. But in the meantime, we're going to go on a little astrological history field trip for a second, because I'm going to show you the aspect first that's happening on April 20th, and then we're going to rewind and talk about the events that have happened when we have seen this exact same aspect. This is why I love astrology also, because it not only talks about your future, but it also brings a lot of the past into the future. It talks about literally how we can learn about the future because of what's happened in the past. Literally nothing is new under the sun when you're looking at astrology. All right, first things first, this is the chart for April 20th, 2025, and we see one big major aspect. Speaking of which, first little astrology lesson, anytime you see a square like that in red when you are looking at a chart, you know that there is some very intense energy happening there. But back to what I was saying, we see that Mars and Pluto are making an opposition. We also see that the moon is about to cross over from Capricorn into Aquarius, where it will conjunct with Pluto, adding on to the emotional intensity, power struggles, and just kind of talking about how the collective is feeling, because Aquarius is more like groups of people. I like to think of it almost as like an audience. Some people would argue that Pisces is more the audience. I think Aquarius is more like the people, especially when we're talking about Mars being in Leo. Leo is often looked at leaders and leadership, like all of that. This aspect becomes even more intense when you think about the fact that both Pluto and Mars are in fixed signs, and the moon is also about to add on to that fixed sign energy. Because what I always think about whenever you're going through any sort of hard aspect involving fixed signs exclusively, you are thinking about a stalemate, a standoff. I think about two rams literally locking horns and just grinding their faces into each other because neither one of them is giving up. So basically, we're talking about major power struggles here. And all of that is squaring the sun in Taurus, which is also a fixed sign. It adds on to things. It's exaggerating it. Taurus, as its own kind of sign, is not just Venusian things like shopping and eating good food, good sex, all the sensual things. Taurus is also a lot about greed. It's about financial things. It's about what we want more of, not just because it's an earth sign that's ruled by Venus, but also because it's just a fixed sign in general. Fixed signs hold the energy of momentum. So they want more of whatever energy they are initially taking from, which is Aries. So anybody that tells you that Taurus is purely peaceful is lying to you. So we can already tell that this square, what we would call a T-square, this opposition plus a square from both Pluto and Mars to the sun in Taurus, is about some sort of financial transformation, some sort of change and action that's having to do with resources, finances, leadership making decisions, and how the people feel about it and what actions are being taken. So let's rewind and talk about what other historical events were happening when we saw Pluto and Mars opposing each other. June 23rd to August 24th, we see that Mars and Pluto actually have switched positions relative to where they're at right now in 2025. But we see that Mars is in Aquarius and Pluto is in Leo, and this was the prelude to World War II. And just as a little extra tidbit of information for those of you that might not be as astrologically savvy, whenever we are dealing with an outer planet that moves a bit slower in some sort of aspect with another planet that moves a bit faster, it's going to take a little bit of time for the full effects of that aspect between the two to come into noticeable effect as far as an event, especially Pluto, because I always like to compare Pluto to the PI that has a sadistic streak, but likes to act like they're your friend first so that they can really nail you later. But let's continue with our historical field trip. October 21st, 1990 through January 2nd, 1991. This was the combat phase of the Gulf War. We see Mars in Taurus and Pluto in Scorpio. I think it's also really interesting that Mars was actually also about to go retrograde in Gemini around this time. And we also see that it's at the tail end of eclipse season. And finally, we have September 21st, 2007 through March 2008. This is the global financial crisis, where we see Mars in Gemini opposing Pluto in Sagittarius. So yeah, that brings us back up to speed now, where we are going to see this opposition happen again on April 20th. We're seeing it perfect, where I'm sure it will be an all new but all too familiar form of chaos. So could martial law be occurring on April 20th? Look, I said fact check and I meant that shit. However, could there be other bigger issues that we could have on the horizon and be hearing about around April 20th? Yep. Do I think that you need to stay in your house and not go outside and not live your life on April 20th? Absolutely not. Do your thing. Just stay safe. Because one thing is for sure, astrology will always tell us where we are headed by where we have been.